Let's swatch all of my Looxi eyeshadows. I don't think I have every one of them, but I do have quite a bit now, and my most recent purchase finally came of their newest kind of neutral metallic shades, which I actually put in an order April 1st, and it just arrived beginning of June, so it took exactly 2 months. There was zero communication in regards to that, and during this time they also had a huge inventory sale. So as of right now, I don't know what's happening with their formula. I know that they used to be handmade, and at the time I'm filming this, I believe they announced that they will be switching to manufacturing these versus hand making them. So going forward, I believe these will be changing. So I have the Salty Clouds collection, which does seem to have a very different formula from the rest of the shadows I have from Looxi, though they do have a couple of different textures. And then the newest collection, I'm not sure if this one was technically the new manufacturer version or not. It is unclear to me. Maybe you have some insight on that, so please leave a comment down below if you know. So I organize these by color, so I want to show kind of similar shades within. And just a disclaimer, just because these swatch like this in my video doesn't mean that these are what you're going to get. Again, right now, really purchase with caution because we don't know what's happening with the formulation. We don't know if the Salty Clouds are going to be the new kind of formula, or if the most recent, I believe they're like Aurora 2s or something like that, if these are going to be the new formula. So keep that in mind, just because these swatch for me right now this way doesn't mean that yours will if you purchase them. And another reason I'm saying that is because I did buy a extra shade that I already own, and they definitely look pretty different. And again, I don't know if this is a permanent change in these two specific shadows, but it is something to watch out for. And one of those shadows is Jaded. So this is the original, this is the new one. The other one is Feels that I have here for comparison. This is the new one, this is the old one, and they definitely are pretty different in actually color as well. So I'm going to swatch these separately because they're just kind of more like a study in the change of the formula slash the shade, because these technically should be the same thing, but they're very much not. Feels is way more dimensional and shifty. So I'm just going to be swatching it on the back of my hand. First up is Feels. This is the original version. This is what it looks like picked up. And this is how it spreads. It is a little bit drier, but it has a little bit of an emollient feeling to it. While this one feels dry, and you can already tell a pretty big difference. And also the way that this one spreads, you can see just these little kind of pieces, and it just feels very, very different. It feels very, very dry. It does spread out. It is not nearly as shiny. Something about it just doesn't feel like quality, and of course, like, there's plenty of shadows like this out there. Not everyone wants this, but in terms of these two shades supposedly being the same thing, they're absolutely not even close. I would even say like they have somewhat of that similar base to them, though I feel that the new Feels is lighter. And then here's what Jaded looks like. It's got a little bit of an emollient feel to it. It is quite shiny, not necessarily shifty or anything. Here's the new Jaded. Again, very powdery, does spread, looks actually a little bit more similar. I think the shine level is different, and there is just a little bit less vibrancy as well. So next up, I'm going to swatch all of these shades together because, as you can kind of tell, they look very, very similar. Here's a closer look at them. They are super, super similar. I think they vary a little bit in the intensity of the base and the shine, and also a little bit of a difference in texture. Here is Wild Child. This one is very much a satin, and it has a really beautiful, like a pinky mauvey base to it, and this is really built up. Here's Jawbreaker, and this one is definitely more sparkly and is a little bit less dry, and this one actually looks a bit different. It has so much dimensionality. It definitely has a shift in it. It has a similar base but lighter, like a lighter pink actually, and it is a stunner. Next up is Hunky Dory, and Hunky Dory is also more of a satin. It has a little bit thicker feel to it in terms of it doesn't pick up very easily. It feels harder pressed but also thicker, and this one has a very like light peachy base to it with a blue reflect straight on. Next up is Razzle Dazzle. Extremely similar. I think this one has a little bit less of a peachy base. It's maybe got a little bit more red in it, just a little bit, especially on an angle. And the reflect is a bit more bright. but the base is also a little bit darker, but obviously I'm trying to build it up so you can see the difference between them. Next shade is Nudie. I don't know if this one's necessarily close, but this one is very much a satin, and this one has a warm base with a yellow peach reflex straight on. Then we have First Class, and this one feels also just a little bit thicker to the touch, but not creamy, like thick. It's got a little bit of waxiness to it. And this one is very similar, especially to these two shades, but it has a blue reflex, so it's actually more close in to this one right here, which I believe was Razzle Dazzle. So it's almost exactly like Razzle Dazzle. And then the last one for comparison is Venus, and this one is, I would say, by far the sparkliest one out of all of these. This one has a bit more of an opaque base to it, so it's very similar to Wild Child, but it has a beautiful, it's a little bit blue leaning, but it's almost kind of hard to read. Maybe a little bit of green in there as well. Next up is Pretty Little Thing, and this is a satin, and it's very, very dry feeling. It's definitely buildable. I think this is a good option for layering. It has a warm beige undertone with a little bit of a kind of brighter, almost silvery reflect to it. Riz is also a satin. I would say it's maybe a little bit shinier than the previous shade, and it has a brown base to it, like a darker brown. I guess it's a little bit warmer toned. I'm a little bit in between if it's warmer or a little bit like neutral leaning, and it has a greenish reflect to it. Next up is Dark Horse, and this one is a little bit kind of flakier, but it still feels very dry, and I can see pinky flecks kind of sitting on top. Feels a little bit similar to actually the Urban Decay Moondust shadows. It has a very warm tone brown base to it, and it has a bunch of kind of fun flecks throughout it, very dimensional shade. Then we have Sus, and this is a beautiful berry-based shade with a golden reflect in it. Very dimensional, feels dry. Next up is Groovy Baby. This is a satin, and this is a really beautiful grassy green that has just a hint of a kind of pink reflect, but I feel like I can't really see it in this lighting, but I can see it on my finger. Let's see if it's gonna translate. It's pretty subtle, and I believe I compared it to, I think it was Royal Pear from Clionadh, so it's kind of similar to that, where you can really see the green base and then just a little bit of that. Next is Deadpan. This one is similar to Riz. I don't quite have these shade names memorized. And this one is for sure similar, but it's got definitely a much warmer, almost reddish base with a brighter green reflect to it. It's very, very smooth and very shiny. And then Dark Side of the Moon. This one feels a little bit waxier. It has a little bit of like an emollient feel to it. And this one doesn't spread the best or layer the best, but this one is a bit shifty. It has a darker grayish base, like almost a black base to it, and it's a really interesting, cooler toned purple, like a smoky purple that shifts almost a copper gold. Fuzzy Flamingo is a little bit on the emollient side, but it is super sparkly. It's such a beautiful pinky peach base with an orangey reflect, and I see even a little bit of like a very light blue on this angle. It is such a stunning shade, and I feel like this is the formula that I think everyone loves from Looxi, especially for the price tag. And then there's Red Hot, which is almost exact same kind of more emollient formula, and this one has like a gold to peach shift, very reminiscent of some shadows we've seen from other brands as well, but at a really great price point. Social Butterfly, definitely more orangey kind of base to it, with a kind of like a greenish tint, but I see a little bit of like a brighter orange with a darker orange, almost brownish base. This one is IYKYK. If you know, you know. And this one is a kind of like a more neutral leaning shadow. It has a lighter base to it. It's pretty warm. It's kind of orangey, and it has a gold reflect on it. Then we have Caterpillar. This one's a really bright kind of orangey coral shade. It has just a little bit of a pale yellow reflect to it, but I feel like it kind of disappeared. This one feels a little bit harder pressed, drier, but like it takes a little bit to spread out. And then Hottie, which this one has a pinky, kind of pinky mauve base. Yeah, something like that. And this one has a orange reflect to it. Next up is Honey. Perfect name for this one. This one feels a little bit drier, but also kind of emollient at the same time. It's such an interesting experience. This one is orange with a lighter orange, almost gold reflect to it. But it's not very shiny, but it's not quite as satin as some of the other shades. And you can kind of see these, just the sparkle level. I believe these are some of the older shades that I have had from them. And by older, I mean like I purchased last year. And then this next shade is Slushy, and this one is from the Salty Clouds collection. And these shades are just not it for me personally. They're just, I don't know even how to explain it. It's a satin for sure, but it kind of feels emollient and dry again at the same time, but in like a really just not high quality way, which I don't expect these to be extreme high quality for the price, but I feel like this is what I would expect to get if I ordered a $2.50 eyeshadow. And this is kind of like the really amazing price point. Next shade is Moth to a Flame. I feel like this one is a little bit similar to, I believe this one was Honey. This one is okay. It's a much more kind of vibrant orange with a bright yellow reflect to it. And the last shade is Shimmy, and this is a beautiful yellow with a purple pink blue shift to it. You can really see the blue mostly, but there is that purple on a harsh angle. Next up is Big Bang, and this one's definitely more emollient and super shiny. It has like a yellow, like a dark yellow, almost orange base to it with a blue to purple shift in it. It is such a stunner. I mean, look at that. It's so shiny. The next shade is Fruity, and this one is from the Salty Clouds, and it's just, there's something, you know what this one reminds me of? Some of the more satin-like shadows from ColourPop, and they just feel like really cheap. They're very like powdery, and I don't mind the satin finish, but I think that there's like a really nice quality satin, and then there's this kind of satin, and I'm not a huge fan of this. And again, this is definitely something where I'm like, okay, you're getting $2.50 worth of an eyeshadow. It totally makes sense. While this one you would look at and you would think, oh, that's definitely more than $2.50. This one must have cost at least like, I don't know, $5, $10 minimum. Next up is Glitz and Ritz. This one is a little bit creamier, just like this shade. And this one, I feel like I've seen this kind of shade so many times. Really beautiful, kind of like a cooler toned pink with a bit of blue and purple in it. Glass Wing feels a little bit thicker to the touch, a little bit drier. And this one is so beautiful, super, super shiny, beautiful, bright pink base, kind of like a Barbie doll pink with a blue reflect to it and a little bit of green as well. Bubblegum feels dry. You can kind of see it's not really spreading evenly. It's going to take a little bit of building up, but it is a nice shade. It is more of a satin, but not quite as much of a satin as this one, so it's kind of like an in-between these two. Feels a little bit dry to the touch, which also could, you know, be potentially from me having it for a year now. I'm not sure how fast this would dry out. Then there's Licorice Lace, and this one feels a little thicker to the touch, but not as creamy, but a little bit creamy, but not as wet as this shade. This one's got a really beautiful, bright, almost like a slightly darker kind of pink. It's almost leaning a little bit orangey from my perspective, and it has a beautiful purple reflect straight on with a little bit of blue as well. So that's why, so some of these are a little bit kind of similar. Next is Fruit Punch. This one feels drier, but also thick at the same time. Takes a little bit to spread out because of that texture. It's a beautiful Barbie pink with a peach reflect to it. Then we have Poppy, which this one is from the Salty Clouds collection, and I just really do not like the quality of this one. But this shade is such a stunner. I think this one would be great for layering shades on top of it for sure. This one's got like a coral pink vibe to it. Next up is Jelly Bean. This one is very shiny. It's got a little bit more of an emollient touch to it. And it's a really stunning, almost slightly like a taupey pink with a bright yellow reflect to it. I think I see a little bit of blue as well. It is a very beautiful dimensional shade for sure. Then there is Oh Bother. This one is a satin, kind of like a mid-tone cream shade. Then there's Peachy, which is from the Salty Clouds collection. Again, a bit more satin, but more shiny than the shade above it. And this one, I don't see too much of a base in it, but it's pretty peachy with a little bit of a yellow gold reflect to it. Arctic Rose is very shiny, very beautiful, but kind of similar to the shade a little bit with a bit less purple in the base. But now that I built it up a little bit, it is a bit similar in the base. It's actually a little bit darker of a base once it's built up. I don't see the same shift though. I don't see the blue in there. So it is different, but it's kind of similar at the same time. This one looks more like a lavender. Next up is Mama Tried, and this one is very powdery, but spreads really nicely and is a very, very shiny. Really beautiful warm tone brown with a gold reflect. Then there's Honeydew, which this one feels a little bit thicker, and you can see the way it spreads out, that it just has that little bit extra tug to it. And this is such an interesting kind of antique gold vibe with a warm brown base. And then the last shade from this set is Gold Rush, and this one is so shiny. A little bit more on the emollient side. It has a lot of dimension. Again, it has a warmer base, but it's a little bit lighter, and it has a green reflect to it, like a greenish yellow gold. Saltwater Taffy, this one is very squishy, like completely squishy. It's got a warmish, almost reddish brown base to it with bright green reflect. Viper, which is one of the new shades. A little bit more satin-like, but not quite as satin as the others. Doesn't feel overly dry or anything. It's actually got a really nice, I think, great kind of texture to it. And we have Extra, which is also from the newest collection. And this one has a brown base again to it, but with a more aqua reflection. Just a really beautiful caramel. This one has a little bit of a thicker feel to it. Took a little bit to spread out. Then we have Hickey, which this one actually feels a little bit like I can feel the texture of the pigment in there a little bit. Not that it feels like it's going to be irritating on the lid, but you can feel a little bit of a grittiness to it. This one is a beautiful green with some gold reflect to it. And this one is a very shiny, very sparkly, but does not feel emollient or anything like that. And then we have the old Jaded and the new Jaded, which feels pretty different in texture. Feels way drier with a little bit of that kind of thickness, waxiness to it. Then there's Emerald City, which is a really vibrant green. Really, really bright, almost a neon green as a shimmer. And then Abacadabra, which has a brown base with a blue reflect. Minty is from the Salty Clouds collection. This one I think is just not a good formula at all. It's very dry and piecey, but like the pieciness is not in a good way. And while my preference is definitely not squishy shadows, I think something about this just does not really exactly scream quality to me. And it's very satin-like, which is totally fine. This just reminds me of some of the ColourPop shades that I have tried, and they just really do not impress me. I think this one would for sure benefit from some sort of tacky primer. Then we have Cookie Dough. This one's got a little bit of a thicker feel to it, and this one has a little bit of a yellow base to it with a aqua, purple, a little bit of a green shift. Then there's Liquid, which this one definitely has a little bit of a thicker feel. It's a little bit more emollient. This is a really beautiful aqua with a bit of a turquoise reflect to it. Next we have Morning Rain. This one feels dry but also thick at the same time. This one has a very interesting kind of chartreuse base with a purple reflect to it. Nightfall is super shiny, a little bit thicker to the touch. Feels a little bit waxy. This one is a darker blue than this one with a little bit of a brighter blue reflect to it. Icy, this one feels a bit similar to this first shade. So very satin-like, just a little bit of a sheen great for layering for sure. Would benefit from a tacky primer if you wanted a little bit of extra oomph with that one. And then here is Salty. This one's also from the Salty Clouds collection, and it's just very powdery, and so it takes a little bit of spreading. And this one is a beautiful periwinkle with purple kind of sparkles throughout it that are kind of very hit or miss. They don't really distribute evenly, so not a huge fan personally. And then Electric Lemonade. This is a really vibrant, slightly thicker to the touch feeling light blue. And then Splash, such a beautiful shade. It's definitely got a lot of shine to it. It's a little bit on the squishy side, a little bit on the waxier, thicker side. It is a very dimensional shade, but I also see a little bit of almost kind of gold flux throughout as well. Onto the last set of swatches. Here is Stormy from the Salty Clouds collection. And this one's definitely way satin-like. It has a really beautiful kind of purpley blue reflect to it. And I see a slightly brownish, very hint of a light brown base. Cookies and Cream is a little bit more of an emollient shadow. This one has a little bit of a yellow base to it, and it has a really bright blue reflect that shifts to purple. Painted Lady also similarly to the shade above. Definitely way more opaque, but also a little bit on the kind of thicker, squishier side. Oob or Ooby. This one feels a little bit drier, but I think it might have dried out a little bit. This one is such an interesting kind of cooler toned pink base with a green reflect to it. It is such a stunner. Royalty from the Salty Clouds collection. This one's kind of like thicker, but also drier and more satin-like. Really beautiful kind of purple. This is the original Feels, the new Feels. Blue Lagoon, definitely a bit more on the squishy side. Really beautiful teal base with a light yellow kind of reflect to it. And I see a pinky purple reflect as well. Hybrid, which has a blue purple reflect to it with a really warm brown base. And then lastly is Chocolate Cherry, and this one is such a beautiful taupey, definitely cooler toned type of neutral everyday kind of interesting neutral shadow. This one is a very cool tone, almost like a olivey brownish base to it. I see a lot of blue flecks throughout it. So Looxi does have a couple of different finishes. Some are very sparkly, some are a little bit less, some are a little bit more metallic. Some are very satin-like, some are kind of between a metallic and a satin. So there's definitely a variety to choose from. But I am not sure if they're going to be keeping all of the shades around that they have had for a couple of years. For example, like Ube, I know that one is definitely a very popular shade. So I'm curious to see what happens in the future and if the new Auroras are going to be the new-ish formulation, or if they're still going to kind of vary it. Maybe the Salty Clouds was meant to be a little bit more on the satin side. It is hard to say because they really don't communicate much, and they kind of just drop a new collection with kind of zero warning. They don't post on their social media just like that they have a new drop, but that's about it. And I also want to mention that with my last order, I got an email that my order had shipped. However, when I clicked on view my order to go see the tracking number, there was no tracking number, and it just said at the top of the page, like, if you have any issues with their delivery, like if it doesn't get delivered within the next few days, like, please just contact USPS, which I don't really think that really necessarily makes sense, as like you didn't even give me a tracking number. And I don't know if that was just a glitch or something, because last year I had ordered about 2 or 3 times from them and I had great shipping experiences with them. So I'm not really sure what happened coming into this year, but it does seem that they're kind of figuring some things out. And now that being said, I do think some of the shades feel more like, okay, these are $2.50 shades, and some of them don't. Some of these shades you will get what you pay for, and with some of them you will get a lot more than what you pay for. So let me know in the comments below your experiences with Looxi, especially if you've ordered in the last year, and if you have any favorite shades. I would love to hear your thoughts. And that's everything for this video. I hope that it was helpful and I hope that you enjoyed it. Thank you so much for watching. I hope to see you next time.